Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video, and welcome back to my TBR Advent Calendar. So this December I am picking a very short book for my TBR to read every day in December and making a video about it. And my TBR Advent Calendar, my Vlogmas this year, is very kindly sponsored by Serious Readers, who make really cool reading lights like this one that I have here. I will leave more details about them down below in the description, as well as the offer code I have on at the moment. And yes, let me get straight into picking today's book from the TBR. So my TBR shelf is down here, and we will reach down and select. Oh, interesting. We have some poetry. This is the poetry of Algernon Charles Swinburne, who was a Victorian poet. I've read like bits and pieces of his before, but not very much, and I've been looking forward to reading some more by him for a while. I picked this up back in September when I was in Hay on Wye, and I thought this would be an interesting read. So I'm looking forward to this. I think this will be good. Yeah, nice to have some poetry in the TBR Advent Calendar too, something a bit different. So I'm going to read this and let you know how I get on with it. Hello again, good evening. I've just finished reading the Swinburne collection of poetry that I had, which, yeah, I have mixed feelings about. I feel like this is the kind of poetry that I found interesting more than I enjoyed. Swinburne is one of those Victorian poets who writes a lot of long poems. Like, most of the poems are several pages, and my sort of preference for poems tends to be like a one-page, two-page poem. I really like a short, brief poem, and most of these are quite long, and like, not only are they sort of several pages, but also there's quite a lot of like text per page. Like, each line is quite long, and I think I prefer a poem that has shorter lines and is shorter overall. Like, I found quite a lot of poetry a little bit wordy, and I feel like it's just, yeah, not like my preferred style of poetry. And I think especially like having read and loved Amy Levy's poetry in October, and just like falling in love with her as a Victorian poet, I feel like it would take a lot for another Victorian poet to like impress me this year. And yeah, I wasn't hugely impressed by these poems, but they were very interesting thematically. So Swinburne writes quite a lot about sort of Greek mythology as a way to write about gender and sexuality, and to kind of like question Victorian assumptions, both about gender and sexuality, but also about like the existence of God and things like that, which is quite interesting. Amy Levy also has quite a lot of Greek references in her poetry, actually, as we're talking of Amy Levy, because, you know, I can't read another Victorian poet without talking about how amazing Amy Levy is. But I found it very interesting how Swinburne kind of uses those ancient Greek elements. There's quite a lot of poems in here about Sappho, or using Sappho. There's one poem from the perspective of Sappho to her female lover, and it's quite interesting to see Swinburne kind of using, yeah, the ancient Greek world to write about sexuality in a way that wouldn't have been acceptable in the Victorian period if he were writing about like contemporary people. It is generally accepted, I would say, that Swinburne was queer in some way, and he's obviously very, very interested in sexuality and gender, and I find it quite interesting reading his poems, thinking about that. But yeah, I would say that I found these poems like thematically interesting, rather than finding the poems themselves as poems like really powerful in the way they were formed and crafted. There were a few I found interesting, but in general I found them, yeah, just a bit wordy and not like packing a punch in the way that I like a poem to do. It probably does depend on your taste in poetry. Like I said, I feel like these poems were just not the kind of poems I love, rather than me thinking that they were bad. I feel like I'm trying to think of like a better way of explaining what I didn't get on with in Swinburne's poetry, but I can't think of one. And this is, you know, a problem with reviewing something 2 minutes after you finished it. Anyway, it was fun to read some poetry for the TBR Advent Calendar, slightly different read. One of my less successful TBR Advent Calendar books so far, I would say, but, you know, interesting regardless, and nice to read some Victorian stuff in December. But anyway, that's all for now. Let me know if you've read anything by Swinburne before, and otherwise I'll be back tomorrow with another bookish video.